Hey, Kevin, great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me. Excited to dive into it.
Awesome. Mate, let's hear from you what your story has been in getting into tech and sales.
The long story short, and I tend to be long-winded, so feel free to cut me off. But growing up, no one ever said that I should be in sales. In fact, sales scared the living daylights out of me. And when I went to college, I first started studying aerospace engineering of all things, and then graduated with a degree in architecture. These things have nothing to do with sales, so I thought at the time. But I'll tell you, graduating in the middle of a mini recession with a degree in architecture and no one's building anything really gave me the opportunity to try something different. And I got into customer service making $10 an hour. And I realized that making $10 an hour and not controlling my own destiny absolutely sucked. And I thought, what are some things that I can do to control my destiny? And Ricky, I came up with two ideas. One, start my own business, or two, get into sales. I didn't have the money or the guts or an idea to start my own business. So I'm like, I'll just give sales a shot. And the fact that I had no previous sales experience, Sean and Ricky, was actually a big benefit to me because I had no bad habits. No one ever said, you have the gift of gab. You're such a good salesperson already. No one ever said that to me. And so I had to learn from the ground up, like all the fundamentals, the blocking and the tackling, the basics of sales. And that actually served me really well when my manager tapped me on the back and said, so maybe you should train some of these other people too around you and be the manager.
Like if you think back to that journey, it's pretty interesting. And there's going to be a bunch of young up and coming salespeople who listen to this sort of stuff. What's the thing that if you think back on now, you go, well, putting my time and effort into this really helped me accelerate my ability to be a salesperson. Because like I said, you weren't the person everyone's tapping on the shoulder going, you're the best salesperson ever, you should be doing this. So you worked hard, you grinded, you learned the skills. What's a couple of tricks that you really worked on that helped accelerate your ability to sell?
So I was unbelievably insecure about my abilities because I was hired with other people that had sales experience. By the way, they had 1 year of sales experience when I look back on it now.
Still 1 year more than you did.
It was infinitely more than me. And Sean, I took stock of the things that I could control. I took stock of the things that I can control. What could I control? I can control how hard I work, number one. Number two, I can take control of everything that I put into my head with respect to education and putting that education into practice. So I read book after book, and back in the day, it was teleseminars. I would dial into teleseminars and really leaning into that education and putting it into practice. And then number three, and this is where the aerospace engineering comes into play. I tracked my metrics. I tracked my own metrics. I still have in my brag book a copy of what my funnels looked like from 1994 to 1997. And I know very few people that do that. That the exceptional treat their profession as their craft, work their butts off. I knew I could work harder than anybody else that was there, regardless of their experience. But do you? Do you quiet quit? Do you make excuses? Do you whine that the quote is too high? This is all distraction. And number three, I tracked all my metrics and optimized from there. I saw where there were problems and then I made changes. Very few salespeople actually do those things. And let's be real, Sean. 1 out of 20 people that listen to this, they'll all nod and say, 20 out of 20 will nod and say, oh yes, of course. But only 1 out of 20 will have the discipline or the guts to actually do the things that I'm telling them right now. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. Kevin, I want to come back to your journey, but before we go there, why are the numbers so bad? Because to your point, if you put 100 salespeople in a room, all 100 of them will nod their head. Other 50 will probably make some note if you're lucky. 20 will actually suggest or think to themselves they're going to do something. The reality is probably only 2 or 3 out of the 100 will actually go do the homework.
Sure.
And the work that it takes. But why? Because it's a profession. It pays well. It's regarded highly. Right?
Sure.
Every business needs salespeople. It's a necessary evil. But yet only a handful want to put in the time and effort and expect the big rewards. What is it about the personality of these individuals that the sales profession attracts that limits them?
Look, there's a everyone knows what a bell curve is. Okay. Everyone knows what distributions of performance, what performance are. And you can find those kinds of distributions in nature and in sports and in business. I don't know the answer, like why. I don't think I know the answer why. All I know is it's just a truism in nature that there's the elite, the Olympic athletes that strain their cottage cheese to get the most fat out of it. There's only a small handful of people that are just willing to do that. Why? I don't know. Nurture, nature. I don't know the answer why, but I know it to be true. And that is that you can find this anywhere. You can find it in sales teams, product teams, marketing teams. There's always the elite and there's always the really bad. And then there's everybody else that sort of coagulates around the middle and the averages. Why?
That makes sense.
I
Yeah.
don't know. Most people are lazy. I don't know.
Yeah. Probably. Make sure of all of that. I guess what I was getting at, Sean's a lawyer from background. I'm an engineer like you are. You couldn't be a bad engineer. You just could not afford to be one. You can't build a bridge that's going to collapse. Like, you will have massive liability. You cannot write a legal contract that will fall on its ass. You can't do those things because it's a professional backed by bodies and institution. I guess sales for many, it's still a craft that one can pick up. And then to your point, if you're willing to work hard, can get good at. But then leaning back to what you said, you put in the work, you mapped out your processes, the funnel, the metrics back in the 90s. What did that look like back then? You were basically, from what I can gather, Kevin, you were doing your own playbook. What elements did it actually include?
These are like 4-letter words, scripts. And you're going to get a bunch of listeners right now that just go click. I'm not listening to this garbage any longer. Hey man, sorry. I wrote down the words that I was going to say because I realized that this is all I had. By the way, it was phone sales. It wasn't in-person sales. It was phone sales. No one was going to give me a chance to walk into a business. And so I realized that the only thing I had at my disposal was the words that were coming out of my mouth. And I had better script it. In fact, my inspiration was when I first got into sales, I knew that was the only tool I had was the words that were coming out of my mouth and how I was using them. And so I started watching newscasters and listening to people on the radio. And I realized that they're like teleprompters. They're like using it looks live, it is live, but they're still using teleprompters. And then they also pay attention to the intonation in their voice and how they use those words there. But the biggest learning lesson, a funny story, Sean and Ricky, that came out of this was I wrote out my scripts and I was all planned out. And I got this controller of this like $30 million manufacturer on the phone in Indiana. And I started going through my script and asking him all the qualifying questions. And at one point, after I got through 3 or 4 of them, he goes, okay, next question. And he just knew. I was so busted. I was so busted. But that was, I didn't know what a playbook meant, Ricky, at the time. Those weren't the words, but I knew that I couldn't just wing it. I couldn't just wing it. And it was only until years later I read The Real Secret to the Top 20% by Mike Brooks, Mr. Inside Sales. And it helped coalesce the belief that sales is one of the things I love the most about sales, especially with the binary background, engineering, pluses and minuses and ones and zeros, is that there's a finite amount of situations that we typically, 99% of the situations are repeatable. But few people are willing to go, I got burned by that blow off or that objection or a question that I was stumped on. Very few people are willing to go, okay, I'm going to back it up. I'm going to write out if I got it again, when I get it again, I'm going to write out those things. And so that was one thing. So scripting for sure, that was for sure part of it. People say, oh, scripts don't work because they're so unnatural. They're unnatural because you don't practice them. They're unnatural. Everybody on TV, everybody on the movie theaters, they're using scripts. They just don't sound like they're using scripts because they practice, number one. And then number two, the funnel was not complicated. It was activity, the inputs. Then there were conversations that resulted from, and of course there was no InMail back when I was getting into it, but still, it still applies though. There's activity, and that could be calls, emails, text messages, voicemails, etc. Activity, conversations, qualified meetings, proposals, close rates. And I didn't know what a sales process was, but I knew that it felt like those were natural checks along the way for which I had to optimize. And I'll never forget one time I planned out my entire year, how much money I wanted to make for the year. And it came down to making 177 calls a day. And
so you reverse engineered it, basically.
I totally reverse engineered.
Yeah.
It wasn't 176 and it wasn't 178. It was 177 calls per day, which resulted in X amount of conversations, qualified meetings, pipeline, and closed one business at an average order value of X with a commission rate of Y. And by the middle of that year, when I had planned it all out, again, as an individual contributor salesperson, I planned it all out. And I was like, sitting there eating dinner with my wife. I'm like, I know precisely how much money I'm going to make by the end of this year because these metrics have all worked out. And it was relieving. It was relieving to have developed a predictable playbook, but I didn't know what playbook was. I didn't know predictable revenue was. Like, these are all words that people throw around. That's that engineering and architecture background. It's the planning and it's the diagramming and it's, you know what I mean? It all suited me very well. And of course, getting into sales leadership, same.
But you're doing it right, so it makes sense, right? In sales leadership, you're doing this planning. But if you think about it, there probably is only a certain percentage of people who have the capability of doing all of that. That's why not everyone ends up in sales leadership. There are plenty of other reasons, but it's a lot of work to figure out your pipeline, to reverse engineer, to understand it. Do you reckon there's something that's worthwhile for sales leaders to do with some of their reps, to sit down with them and go, hey, is there a number you want to earn this year? And they're like, yeah, actually I want to make this. Cool. This is how, let's go work. We already have, as leaders, we have all these numbers. They exist. They're sitting in our dashboards, in our spreadsheets. Doing it per individual wouldn't be that difficult to do. Do you reckon that's something is that inspiring to a rep? Is that what reps want to see and gives them a bit more control over their actual personal journey?
The answer is yes, but there's actually 3 variations of this. And I want to call it out there because, like, you're cooking with gas and like you're right on. First, all the numbers exist. You're right. And a sales leadership mistake that I made, Sean, was knowing all my numbers or knowing all the numbers and then imposing those numbers on sales reps. So that's version number 1. I think that's a mistake. Through my own experience. Okay. Version number 2, how much money do you want to make? Let's reverse engineer that. That's 10 times better than version number 1. Okay. Because now you're figuring out, like, okay, great. We're going to customize the plan for you. And then we're going to start looking at your own conversion rates. And that might actually result in less calls because you have a higher conversion rate to conversation, or your deal sizes are bigger or smaller, whatever. That's great. But option number 3 is where the magic is. Option number 3 is, instead of simply pegging that to the amount of money they want to make, because a fallacy in sales is that salespeople are unbelievably money motivated. I'd rather find out what their aspirations are. Maybe money is a part of it. Go on a vacation to Bali, pay down student debt. Does that make them money motivated? Maybe, but there's a larger being there. And if you can tie what they do, Sean, in their work on a daily basis to the bigger goal of buying a house or getting married or paying off student loans or something else, now, oh my gosh, now that is a recipe for putting it all together. I'll never forget a sales manager who said to me, what kind of car do you want to drive by the end of this year? Sean, I could give a rat's ass what kind of car I drive. I'm not a car guy. I could care less. I drove a Prius up until 2.5 years ago. Please, I could care less. But that was a sales leader that assumed that a fancy car is something that was important to me. And that's where I impose the numbers. Okay, fine. Doesn't really work. I don't say, fine. How much money do you want to make? Great. That's better than just imposing numbers. But figuring out why. their work in and tying their work to that's like infinitely better.
100% agree. I probably should have explained that better. But I guess the first one that you said is bad is what pretty much 99.99% of companies actually do. The company needs this. Therefore, we need to sell this much. Therefore, your numbers are X. And everyone has the exact same number and you must go get X. You can't get away with it completely because companies still need to hit goals, right? But as a sales leader, you could be like, hey guys, so the company, we need to sell around this year as a total. Like that's where we're going for as a total team total, that's where it is. And then individually break it down. And I know one of the first lessons I learned when I was very young as a lawyer, my boss is like, oh, did you want to get a house? And talking about all that. And I'm like, yeah, I'd love a house. And he's like, cool. My favorite thing in life is when my staff buy a house. And I'm like, oh, really? Why? That's so nice of you. Oh, he's like, no, because then you get a mortgage. And once you have a mortgage, you have to work your ass off to pay it off. And I'm like, oh, good point. But what he was trying to teach me is getting to understand your employees and what their hopes and dreams are is pivotal to being able to make their journey more than just about money. Because money you can get anywhere, in any job, for any company. But if you feel like they know you and what you're trying to achieve, and you should be doing this anyway as a freaking decent leader, then you find you're a part of that journey. You feel connected to it. So I resonate with what you're saying. It's I think a good way of being able to let someone who might not have all the skill sets yet early in their journey to do what you did because of your background, still have some sort of control over achieving some of the goals they've set for themselves. So I think,
yeah, I think it really speaks, Sean, to the difference between IQ and EQ, intellectual, like high, boy, that sales leader is really smart. Okay, but does that sales leader care about me? Does that sales leader care about where I go with my career? Or is that sales leader intimidated that I'm going to take their job or something like that? It's a real, and it took me a while as a, I guess, dyed in the wool, engineer or something like that to go, oh yeah, showing care for my salespeople and oftentimes love. And I mean that in the most platonic of ways, of course, but true caring and true love to the people that work for you. It's not weird. It's actually an unbelievable motivator when they believe that you're truly acting in their best interest. And it's difficult, by the way, especially as a leader, because you're stuck in between. There's the business needs, and then there's the sales reps needs. And oftentimes as leaders, we have to walk that line. And sometimes that love is expressed in being able to be truthful with them and say, look, man, your quota's going up and your commission plan's getting worse. And I'm explaining to you why I care about you and I'd like to work with you, but we have to do it this way, as opposed to just saying, hey, suck it, man, vote with your feet. I don't care. There's a big difference.
Yeah. I think a lot of people listening out there, Kevin, will say to that, you end up then falling in the two camps, right? One camp where you're just dictating what the company is telling you to do, or the other where you just become too close to reps. You become a mate of theirs and you create this us versus them scenario. With all the experience that you've had with all the different organizations and sales leaders that you worked with, Kevin, how does one go about finding that balance? Because especially if you're a rep who's worked towards a sales leadership role within the same organization, you're going to have a bunch of buddies that you used to work with. Now, all of a sudden, you're leading them. How do you create a healthy boundary to ensure they're set up for future success, but don't fall in the trap of just being another mate?
I've actually gotten into some fairly intense debates on LinkedIn about this particular topic. And it seems as if many sales leaders believe that they can be friends with their sales reps. And I just say, go ahead, man, light the wick. You just go ahead and light the wick on the bomb, dude, and do whatever you want, because time will tell. You will find out that there is a situation when you thought you were friends with that person and you were communicating with them in such a way on social media, or you went to a concert with them, and then something happened at work and you had to be the boss. You're going to find out very quickly if you really are friends in the first place. And so, Ricky, I think you were looking for a far more graceful answer to how do you create that balance? Yeah. And from what I can tell and my own personal experience, I had to get my ass handed to me in a scenario where I thought somebody was my friend on my sales team, to learn that sales leaders and salespeople cannot be friends. The business always gets in the way. Now, that doesn't mean we can't be friendly. That doesn't mean I can't be respectful and friendly. But I am not going out with a sales rep, especially by themselves, okay, one-on-one, and having a bunch of drinks and staying out past 9 o'clock. I've learned the hard way that is a recipe for disaster. You roll the dice again and again when you do stuff like that. You're friends with them on Facebook, you're friends with them on Instagram, you're sharing stuff. You're rolling every time you try and be friends with a rep. And I'm done trying to explain to people that it's not a recipe for success, because whether they're top producers or bottom producers, time will tell. You will eventually find out that you just can't be friends with your sales rep. You're going to learn the hard way.
Makes sense. Hey, the other criticism that a lot of the sales leaders face, Kevin, is this whole driving inputs versus outputs. I worked with many, and I've had many working for me who go, I don't really care what the rep does. And as long as they get to their quota every month, every quarter, every year, I honestly do not care whether they're making 200 calls, 177 by your calculation, going back in your time. What matters most? Is it input? Is it the discipline? Or is it actually just the result, in your opinion?
Anytime somebody says to me, inputs don't matter, it's all just about the outputs, I'm not going to be a micromanager. Tell me you've never scaled a team past 8 to 12 sales reps without telling me that you've never scaled a team past 8 to 12 sales reps, okay? Look, you cannot. This is the one that your users need to tattoo on their arms now. You can't manage outputs. You can only manage inputs. You can't manage outputs. You can only manage inputs. And there's a way in which you manage inputs that end up making you be your micromanaging. Okay. Are you in your seat at 8:01? Are you there at 5:01? You know what I mean? Did you make your 77 calls before 11 a.m.? Like that kind of stuff, super micromanaging. However, if you set expectations that your salespeople need to be making X amount of contacts, conversations on a daily basis with your target customers, or generate a certain amount of qualified pipeline on a regular basis, okay? That is, and you set those expectations and you hold your sales reps accountable to those expectations. That's the way you should do that, but manage those outputs. And I've learned that the hard way. I thought it would be great to build the sales team at ZipRecruiter, and I should have known better. After all the experience I had up until that point, I thought, great, come and go as you please, do what you want. I don't care how many calls you make. I don't care when you're in the office, and just hit your number. That's all that matters. That worked well until it was about 12, 14, 18 salespeople on the team. And once again, we started to see that distribution of performance occur. And now I've set the tone that having 2 drinks at lunch is fine, and leaving halfway through Friday is totally fine, because all I care about is that you're hitting your goals. But of course, not everybody was hitting their goals. So now what? Change management. And you know what happened then? Glassdoor reviews start going in the toilet. People are running to HR because I'm changing things and I'm micromanaging them. And I let Sean's, yep, let me jump in on this one. It's a disaster. And so learn from my mistakes. It's actually better to start tight and then get loose than starting loose and then getting tight from there. You cannot manage outputs. You must manage the inputs.
Which is it's interesting.
Yeah.
Because then if you have sales managers going, I don't care what they do, as long as they hit their number, they're really not a sales manager, because they're not managing anything, right? In reality, like you said, you can only manage the activity and the components that they're doing. If we're not managing any of that, then really you're just there for them to check in.
Yeah.
But playing devil's advocate, a lot of them will say they're managed by exception, because to your point, if you've got 10 on your team, I totally agree that you need a machine, you need a process. But if I'm that superstar rep on your team, Kevin, I'm hitting my numbers month in, month out. You've set me higher quota, I've smashed that. You've set me a higher quota, I've even smashed that.
Mhm.
I've been on the team for 5 years. So do I get to play by the same rules as the others? Or just because you're tightening the processes for the wider team, do I now get to be the superstar and kind of push my weight around? Or do I have to obey by your rules? Because a lot of people are going to ask you that question, because that's reality is bell curve. That's what happens. You've got one or two superstars who get to do their own thing.
Hey, Sean, Ricky is leading the witness. Here's the other one to tattoo on the other arm. The inmates don't run the asylum. Okay. And I learned that the hard way as well, Ricky, because I said that at one of the companies that I was at before. If you crush your numbers, you don't have to do this, that, and the other. And these people would come in smelling like they've been drinking all night, wearing flip-flops in the office. Some of the ladies even would be wearing half shirts and stuff like that. And then when I would call them out on it, they would say to my face, "You said that if I hit my numbers, I could do whatever I want." And this goes to my next point, which is it's about expectation setting. Okay. When I'm coaching CEOs, founders, CROs, I tell them that anything that's important to you, you need to write down as expectations. Your salespeople aren't mind readers. Okay. So if you don't want them to be wearing half shirts and short shorts and flip-flops and baseball hats, then you need to write that down. And you can't say, if you find yourself saying things like, they should know better, you're asking for trouble. The objection to that, Ricky, becomes from the founders and CEOs. God, do I need to wipe their butts too? Do I need to delineate everything for them to do? You need to define the things that are important to you. If you expect them to behave in a certain way, then you need to define those things. There's no mutual mystification. There's no room for mutual mystification when you're running a sales team. And that can be frustrating. That can be frustrating at times. And I always like to say when I'm coaching people and leaders, sometimes you need to slow down to speed up. Sometimes you need to.
And that applies to every team, not just sales. As you scale your business as a leader, if something is super important to you, hoping that the rest of the company is going to guess that it's super important to you and therefore do it is stupid. And I've had plenty of discussions with people where like, it's so frustrating. I'm like, have we had the discussion with the said team about this? No, because it's common sense. I'm like, a view of common sense. If you have that expectation, have the discussion and then get the feedback. Your team might say, "Hey, I get where you're coming from, but you're a dick and I'm not going to do that." And then we've got a path we can go down and have discussions with whether from a company perspective, we want to do this. But then having that sort of communication with people is important because expectation setting is only expectation setting if you actually set the expectation.
I have an unbelievable 3 sales people in a room. I have a funny story to tell you that was my first lesson, sales management, sales leadership lesson in this area. I managed a guy long ago. This was like 2002. And I won't name his name. And
Sean,
he wasn't hitting his quota. He hadn't hit his quota in 6 months. 6 months. He hadn't.
It does sound like me.
He was my manager. I'm sorry. I was his manager. He hadn't hit his number in 6 months. And so I went to HR and I said, he hasn't hit his number in 6 months. And so I'd like to terminate him by the end of this month. And I hated it at the time, but bless her heart now, she said to me, "Does he know that was the expectation?" And I went, "Are you freaking kidding me? He's in sales. He should know that it's expected of him to hit quotas." And you know what she said? Again, just genius zinger right back at this dingling. That's me. "He hasn't hit his quota in 5 months. You haven't said anything to him." Oh man, burned.
This is like a recurring nightmare I'm having every time this conversation like this comes up. I'm like, oh, really? Yeah. This happened to me multiple millions of times.
We need to stop doing these podcasts, right? They're just deepening the pain every time you hear these people say this.
I've had that conversation many times, Kevin. Have you had discussions? Are they on a notice period? Is anything in writing? No. I'm like, well, then, yes, what? You can start that process.
Yeah, so bad, man. So bad. But hey, you'll learn. And this is what I was saying before, Ricky. Look, man, go ahead. Don't set expectations. And then you'll just learn by getting burned. And I feel like I know I am successful today because of the hundreds and thousands of mistakes I've made. Okay.
Sure.
And learn from those. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you're going to argue with me about, and I'm not saying you, I'm just saying the collective you. If you're going to argue with me about writing down your expectations, have at it. Because I know where it's going to go, but you just have to clearly experience it for yourself. Go right ahead.
These are the same conversation we have every day, right? That's our professional living now. Going back to your point, I really enjoyed what you said about the fact you've got to be really intentional and clear from the outset about expectations. And that begins at the time of hiring, right? Not after. You can't be loose to begin with and then tighten the grip. Like it's got to be from the time you put the job advert out. So, Kevin, with all the experience that you've had, walk us through as to what does your hiring process look like? How do you go find these superstars? Because a lot of good salespeople are good at selling themselves. I've not really had one bad interview with any salesperson, and I'm one of those who go, "Oh, yeah, they sound cool. They know what they're doing. They understand all the lingo. Surely they're going to be awesome by the time they come on my team."
Yeah.
And then guess what? 2 weeks.
Yeah.
2 weeks later, Sean's reminding me of the process.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how do I avoid that mistake? What do I, as a sales leader, need to ensure that I get it right from get-go?
Yeah. Here's another quote for you. Many salespeople are better at interviewing for the job than actually doing the sales job. And we get burned by that 1,000 times over. And how do you mitigate that? Look, I went through a process back in 2006, 2007, where I had to lay off like 80% of my sales team. 80% of my sales team. It wasn't all my fault, but I took responsibility for the vast majority of the mishires that I had made. And I had to lay off like several dozen salespeople one day. And it was the first time I did it. And it was awful. I felt awful about having to do that. So I read book after book after book, not the least of which being Top Grading for Sales, Never Hire a Bad Salesperson Again. And what I learned was that exceptional and elite interviewers have a very well thought out process. They don't wing the interview process. Number two, they treat that as like their number one skill, because your job becomes so much easier when you can hire 80% of your salespeople as great salespeople or good salespeople. Your job is going to be far easier than if you're at only 30% or 50% of the people that, coin flip of hiring good salespeople. So how do you go about doing that? The first thing is defining what actually good looks like. Many people don't even stop to do that. And here's the question to get this exercise going. If the job was to speak to me objectively and tell me what it needs for elite performance, what would it tell me? The job. What would it tell me it needs for superior performance? And you get in a room with people who have done the job, manage the job, support the job, or around the job, CEO, VP, administrative assistants, media planners, whatever. And you get these 4, 5, 6 people in the room, and virtually speaking, and you brainstorm 30, 40, 50 different words. So you need grit, and you need resourcefulness, and you need coachability and drive. And you just start writing all these things down. Then you go through an exercise of narrowing that down. And you want to narrow that down to 8 to 12 characteristics that are the most important, okay? Then you define those things. And then you come up with 3 behavioral-based questions for each of those. Behavioral-based questions being, tell me about a time when you're trying to ascertain organizational skills or coachability or competitiveness or optimism or whatever. Tell me about a time when you brainstorm the skills that the job requires, narrow it down to 8 to 12, define what each of those characteristics actually look like, then come up with 3 behavioral questions for each of those 8 to 12, and you put that into an interview template. And then when you send your interview team in to interview them, you say, you're assigned optimism, you're assigned competitiveness, you're assigned this, and you ask these questions. I'm not asking you to ask how many golf balls are in a bus, can fit into a yellow bus. Like these are dumb questions. These are the questions that you're going to ask. And you consistently ask these questions and then optimize your results. Here's the stupid, simple way to gauge your hiring success rate, by the way. And this is going to be so complicated, it's going to blow your listeners away. You make a hire and you look back 6 months after you've made that hire, and you simply ask yourself the question, knowing what you know now, would you hire that person again? Yes or no? Yes or no? Not on a scale of 1 to 5, like none of that. Knowing what you know now, would you hire that person again? And after 6 months, and if you start seeing that you're under 50%, which is just like coin flip average, under 50%, You need to go back to those characteristics. You need to go back to that hiring process and figure out, okay, are you asking the right questions? Do you have the right characteristics of what it takes to be successful in that job? I can go on, by the way, you can tell I'm passionate about this. I can go on and on about this, but that is the first step, is defining what good looks like. And that's how you do it in that 3-step process that I described.
Awesome. Makes a ton of sense. So we've spoken about hiring, we've spoken about bringing the sellers on your team, and then setting expectations. Can you talk me through deal reviews, Kevin? Is that something you're a big fan of? When should they be done? If so, how should they be done? Should you look at every deal that comes through, whether it's a win or loss? Or do you wrap all of that information that you gather into a QBR? What are the differences? I'm an early stage founder, so I've got a team of 4 people. How do I do it?
Certainly at the early stage. All I know is pre-IPO tech companies. Okay. Mostly A round, B round. It's all I know. So how it works at big companies, I don't know. But highly transactional sales, in my experience, we're just looking at the numbers. There's too much velocity going on when we're doing 1.5 deals per rep per day. Okay. Which is a real number at ZipRecruiter, by the way, 1.5 deals per rep per day. We're not doing deal reviews. It's really about the funnel metrics from there and general skills. And of course, individual coaching there, but not deal by deal review. Okay. So that's the difference. On the enterprise side, 100%, the whole thing. And frankly, I'm a highly optimistic individual, but when it comes to deal review, I'm always trying to think about how this deal comes unhooked. I become very pessimist. I want to review the deal from a very pessimistic perspective. Here's a question I always like to ask. The sales rep has a close date, an anticipated close date. Is that your date or is that their date? Is that your date or their date? Oh, it's their date. How do you know? Have they told you that they want to sign the document, the purchase order or the contract on that particular date? And you can work it all the way back through procurement and through IT review and all that kind of stuff to go, you didn't really ask them the direct question, is that your date? Or so you want to sign this deal. I find that to be one of the most valuable questions to ask. Who, other than yourself, of course, is going to be involved in this process? And especially these days, if we're selling and we're not selling to the CFO, especially at mid-market and enterprise types of sales, and we're not selling to the CFO and we're selling SaaS and there's no conversations with IT happening, something's wrong. That deal's not happening. And I'm thinking about all these different ways. Now, you mentioned closed won deal analysis and closed lost deal analysis. And one of the problems that I found, especially in enterprise sales in this area, Ricky, is that you can't get to statistically significant results. You have to make your best judgments with a limited set of data, especially with earlier stage companies, VC-backed companies there, and do your best, but continue to be tracking the results. My product team and marketing team loved listening to my enterprise sales gong calls, by the way. They loved to aggregate that information, to take that into marketing messages and take that into product. But I digress. It's not the same thing as a deal review. And it's not the same thing as a closed won or closed loss analysis, which I gravitate towards the data. You want to know a pet peeve, by the way, and I'm sure you guys can agree. Other. Reason for loss, X, Y, Z.
Number one.
Other.
The number one reason.
Miscellaneous.
Other or miscellaneous. Please don't have other or miscellaneous because it's useless. It's useless when you're trying to do this closed won analysis or closed loss analysis. And by the way, both are important. If anybody knows anything about what confirmation bias means, survivorship bias. If you're only looking at closed won deals, but you're not looking at the closed loss deals or other, vice versa, both simultaneously, you're going to suffer from survivorship bias when you're looking at the closed ones, but not the closed losses, and figuring out where the differences are from there. Totally on board. Love doing those. But for me, it's enterprise sales, 20K, 50K, and larger type of sales. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I agree with you. I was going to ask you a follow-up question from that. When is it okay for a deal to slip? because you're going to have that. Like I have not worked on a team. I've really large teams, but despite your best, if there's going to be a certain amount of deals that do slip. So in your view, Kevin, when is it okay for the deals to slip and what should be the reasons behind it? Other can't be one, right? We've discussed that. So what is a valid reason?
Look, I'm a nutso sales leader. Okay. So there's no time where I'm like, it's okay. It's okay. But it happens. And what I find absolutely unacceptable, though, is when I finish a quarter and I can't get a good answer out of my directors or managers or the reps as to why. The last CRO job that I had, that was one of the first things that I had to do. It was year end and a bunch of deals just slipped into the new year. And since I had just taken over the team, I get to play the dummy. Oh, well, I don't know. Explain. Let me find out what happened. And you know what ended up happening is that we just weren't talking to power. We were just merely talking to a bunch of underlings. And that was, of course, obvious, but great insight and helped structure what we did in Q1 moving forward, because we weren't gaining access to power. We were selling to people that we thought were champions, but they weren't really champions because they weren't going to introduce us to anybody else in the buying cycle, and they were containing information. Stuff like that. So I feel like I have unbelievably unrealistic expectations where I don't find it acceptable that deals should slip. I'm not happy when they slip, but it happens. What I find unacceptable is that when we can't identify why they slipped and learn from, that's the unacceptable piece. That's the piece I get pissed off about.
Makes a ton of sense. I don't want to get pulled up and go into a pip conversation with you once I've marked a deal down as slipped third time in a row, right? So talk to me about crafting compensation in the early stage, right? I've now got to a point where I've got a sales leader. He's got the team up to about size 8. The early stage compensation, which was really just to drive the momentum of the business and make sure we find the product market fit, is no longer suitable. So what should that second stage of compensation or scheme should look like? What are the key ingredients to success?
Stupid simple. Stupid simple. Look, you may be at 8 to 12, but at that stage, you don't have significant amounts of rev ops and analysts and things like that, and compensation specialists and all that kind of stuff. And oftentimes, at least in my experience, I was the one that was pulling the reports out of Salesforce and sending it to payroll. Stupid simple. Keep it really simple. I know that people don't necessarily like this per se. I do like straight line comp. And I do, what do you call it? Cliffs. Okay. So if you're below 70% to goal, you don't get anything. And I do like the straight line compensation up to a point. And then when you get above a threshold, you get a bonus for that, which
accelerators.
I'm calling it straight line comp, but I'm also robbing from the poor to give to the rich. That's right. That's why I firmly believe in this like super simple compensation, a certain amount of either a certain percentage of the deal or a bonus based on you get to 100%, you get 100% of comp. You get to 120%, you get 120% of comp. But if you're below 70%, you get nothing. And if you're above 130%, you get your 130% of comp plus a little extra bonus. And of course, it feels like an accelerator, but I don't want to get into these complicated spreadsheets because I'm the one who's going to have to administer it or somebody else is going to have to administer it. And it just gets more complicated between 8 and 25 with limited resources. Stupid simple, one. Number two, gotta be aligned to the company. Okay. Gotta be aligned to the company. Don't, again, this is controversial. If the company cares about receivables, don't pay the salesperson on the contract close. Okay. Don't be an idiot. Okay. Because what's going to end up happening is the contract close, the payment occurs, and payment occurs to the salesperson, but the payment from the client doesn't happen. What happens next? Clawbacks. We're not having this conversation to clawbacks. Okay. So let's not do that. So if receivables are important to the business, then make the payment to the salesperson contingent upon payment from the customer. We're aligned. Do I want my salespeople being collection agents? The answer is 1000% no. And most of the companies that I talk to, they tell me that their, receivables issues, they're not that bad. They're not that bad. So we fear when we do something like that, pay the salespeople based on collections, the immediate response is, oh, I don't want my salespeople to be collections agents. Your collections are that bad, you got bigger problems as a business. Okay. Rather than your salespeople being collections. And I'd say the final thing, Ricky, would be make sure you're defining things very clearly. My compensation plans, when I write them, they've got the first 3/4 of the page that define very specific things. Most notably, what equals a closed won deal? What equals a closed won deal? What happens when they leave the company? How do you pay them then? Do you define those things in the compensation plan so there's those expectations, Sean, are crystal clear when you sign those comp plans? So I would say I can go on and on about that. There's a lot of different levers and opinions and conversations there. Keep it simple, align to the goals, and define as much as you can and set expectations in the document.
Nice. Love it. Now that we've got easy stuff out of the way, Kevin, we'll move to quick fire round.
Let's go.
Easy one to kick off. I think I know the answer, but we'll love to hear from you. Favorite sports team?
Go Niners, baby. Look at my little Niners guy. They lost this weekend. The San Francisco 49ers.
Yeah.
San Francisco 49ers.
Game.
Our first loss of the season?
Yeah, they're now 4 wins and 1 loss, unfortunately. It was brutal against the Cleveland Browns, but hey, can't win them all.
Can't win them all. Favorite music genre, Kevin?
Grunge for sure.
Nice.
Like it. You didn't say rap. It's always nice when someone doesn't say rap.
I've actually developed an appreciation for rap. There's a great Netflix video, Hip Hop Revolution. I recommend anybody and everybody.
There you go, Sean.
Yeah. It's
sass and hip hop go hand in hand.
Yeah.
There you go.
It's probably playing in the background right now in Ricky's house.
That's hilarious.
That's it. Favorite movie of all time? Do you have one, Kevin?
I want people to think that it's like How to Weave an American Quilt or something like really nice like that, but no, it's not. My favorite movie of all time is Dumb and Dumber, for sure. I could watch that again and again and again. Most quotable movie in my family to date.
Yeah. It's not the first time it's been mentioned, so you don't feel bad.
All right.
Classic. How about a favorite place to visit, either you've been to or you want to get to?
If someone could teleport me to Paris, France tomorrow, I'd go there. I just love it there. It's New York without all the crowds, in my opinion, and the subways don't smell as bad as New York or San Francisco BART system. Paris, France, man, I go back again and again.
That's your city, huh? Man, you should be over there right now. There's Rugby World Cup going on. Catch a game or two.
Yeah, and the Olympics are coming up soon too.
Yeah.
Amen.
Hey, now this is the main one. This is what the whole podcast is designed for. You cannot let me down on this peanut butter. How do you like it? Crunchy or smooth?
It's crunchy.
Oh, he's crunchy team.
100%.
I'm crunchy.
Crunchy, mate.
That's crunchy. There's no other answer. There's only one answer to this. It's crunchy.
Yeah, right.
If you said smooth, we edit it out anyway.
Come on.
We edit all the smooths out, so everyone just says crunchy one way or the other.
There you go. I mean, without the crunch, it's just butter.
Exactly.
Right?
Like, why even have it? Doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Awesome. But this has been fun, KG. Thanks for hopping on and thanks for sharing all your insight. I appreciate it, man.
My pleasure. Super fun. Happy to be on the show again, but this was absolutely fantastic. Thanks for having me.